I want to get more on this with the read from South Dakota Republican and Senate Minority Whip John Thune. Senator Thune, thank you so much for coming on the show. You know, trying to set the stage here for what obviously is an extraordinary moment and maybe a moment that Republicans have hoped for, with the sense that something serious could be done for border security under this administration.
That's the plan, Charles. You know, I think that we do have an opportunity here. The Democrats clearly and the president want desperately to get a supplemental bill, appropriations bill passed that helps fund the efforts in Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific. And what we've argued all along is we got a national security crisis at our southern border, and national security starts at home. We cannot move a national security bill that doesn't address that crisis. And there isn't a day goes by where we're not getting more and more signals that you've got people on the terrorist watch list who have been coming into the country, trying to get into the country illegally, and you know, through the southern border. Some of them getting caught, but there are a ton of gotaways. Who knows how many of those gotaways are perhaps on the terrorist watch list or have malign designs on the United States. One way or the other, we know at some point there's going to be an incident here, and that incident's going to get traced back to somebody who came across our southern border. The terrorists have figured it out. The cartels obviously have figured it out. It is time for us to get serious about shutting it down.
Senator, also, back in March, the White House released a fact sheet. President Biden's budget strengthens border security, enhances legal pathways, and provides resources to enforce our immigration laws. The piece went on, the news release went on to say that the president he's done more than all the presidents before him, deploying the most agents ever, 23,000. We understand how the game is played. Are Republicans making sure that it's not just that we have agents down there, but that they're allowed to do their jobs? Because agents sitting around at these big gaping holes at the border watching folks come in and salute them is not exactly what we call security.
No, and that's a critical distinction you just pointed out, Charles. Yes, there may be people down there, but if you are not being allowed to enforce the law, and clearly this administration could be doing this on their own. They don't need additional authorities from Congress. All they simply have to do is enforce the laws that are on the books today. They have chosen not to. And so what we have said is we are going to require this administration to start paying attention, one, to the laws that are in the books, but also to give them more authorities to do what they should have been doing anyway. But when you look at the numbers we saw last week, which were 10 to 12,000 every single day, you annualize that, that's over 4 million a year. And remember, back under the Obama administration, then Department of Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson said 1,000 a day would overwhelm our system. We saw on Tuesday of last week over 12,000 people be apprehended trying to come across the border illegally. The magnets are there, the big green light is there, all the signals are saying come, and we've got to change that because it's now no longer just a humanitarian issue. This is a national security crisis. A lot of bad people coming across our southern border.
Yeah, and now, of course, you have Democratic mayors and governors who are echoing sort of the same thing. They won't acknowledge necessarily the security threat, but the financial strain, which have been really, unfortunately, these smaller towns and border towns had to absorb the big brunt of that. On the other side of this, the funds for Ukraine, what do Republicans want to see? I mean, we're hearing sort of either a path to victory or a strategy toward victory. We thought maybe that this winter, that there would have been more progress. Obviously, a lot of that's hope, but some of it was sort of a promise, and it hasn't really materialized yet.
Right, and so the opportunity we heard to hear from President Zelensky this morning, and I had the opportunity to ask him a question. I raised 3 issues with him. One was obviously the importance of dealing with our national security crisis at our southern border, which he doesn't have any control over, but the other 2 things he does, and that is to make sure that there are clearly identified objectives, both near-term and long-term, and what are the capabilities that he needs to achieve those objectives, so that when we provide additional support, we know how it's going to be used. And I think there's a lot of support for giving them what they need in terms of military aid, lethal aid, but we want to see progress in that conflict. And secondly, make sure that the dollars that are being sent over there are spent wisely and well. And so we raised the issue of corruption, and he addressed that issue. I think it's really important that the American taxpayer know that if we're going to help assist them, and we should try and help them stop Putin's advance and his attacks on what could be other places in Europe.
Sure.
Clearly that starts in Ukraine, but we need to make sure that our tax dollars are used wisely and well, and those are the questions we've been raising with him, and got some of his responses this morning when he was here.
Were you happy with those responses, or did they leave any some uncertainty?
Well, I think that largely, generally speaking, happy. The one thing I will say, and one of the things that clearly came out, in my view, is, and we've been saying this all along, if they had gotten some of these military assets earlier when they asked of the Biden administration for them, we might be in a lot different place today. Unfortunately, they have delayed in many cases getting them the things that they need to succeed on the battlefield, and that's something also that I think has hurt the effort.
Yeah, that's deterrence. We know always is the first thing that you want in these sort of situations, and maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. Just moments ago, Israel was speaking down at the UN. There's this really, some would say, ugly push into the UN, not just calling for a ceasefire, but obviously casting Israel in a very negative light. What part of this negotiation is Israel and Israeli aid play?
Well, for sure, we're going to support our ally Israel, and it's a big part of it. There are 4 components to this. It's aid for Israel, aid for Ukraine, aid in the Indo-Pacific to sort of reinforce Taiwan, and then obviously our southern border. But with respect to Israel, the one thing we want to make sure is any dollars that go over there aren't ending up in the hands of Hamas. And so we want clear conditions and restrictions placed on the assistance there to make sure that the Israelis are controlling it, and that any money that's going into Gaza isn't ending up in the hands of the terrorist group that has wreaked all this havoc.
Right.
and created this horrific acts in that area of the country, or in that area of the world, I should say.
Senator, I got to go, but before I do, the messaging part of this always seems to overshadow what should be logical negotiations and maybe faster resolutions. It seems like there's a public relations effort now to pin any sort of Ukrainian defeat on Republicans. Whether this goes through or not, the lollygagging, the waiting, the gamesmanship, how do you push back against that?
Well, look, I just say it's up to the Democrats. They have the majority here in the United States Senate, and they have the presidency. If the president wants assistance for Ukraine, many of us are inclined to support that request, but it's got to come with some border security measures that defend America's borders first and foremost. They could do that tomorrow, Charles. So it's, obviously they're trying to win the messaging war here, but in our view at least, if all they have to do is come to the table, work with us to reinforce our southern border, to try and deter the national security threats that we believe are very real down there, and we can address these national security issues that we're facing elsewhere around the world.
Senator John Thune, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Charles.